When hunters become the hunted, the wild shows no mercy. From Kodiak's blood-soaked rivers to Costa Rica's volcanic slopes and Alaska's frozen tundra, these stories prove that nature strikes fast, hard, and without warning. Grizzlies tear through steel, mountain lions stalk from shadows, and even moose and ice can kill with terrifying precision. No weapon, no experience, no fortress can guarantee safety when instinct and power collide. Every roar, every snap of branches is a reminder, out here, man is never in control. Watch till the end. It was November 7th, 2025, in a remote area in Kodiak Island, Alaska, a place known for its wild beauty and unpredictable danger. A group of 6 seasoned hunters had arrived earlier that week, ready for one of the most challenging hunts in the world, tracking the island's coastal brown bears. The team included Logan Price, Carter Hayes, Tyler Quinn, Derek Foster, Jonah Ellis, and Marcus Shaw. Each man was experienced, strong, and confident, having hunted in harsh regions before. Yet none could imagine the nightmare that would unfold in the darkness of that cold Alaskan night. The men set up camp near a winding river that cut through dense spruce forest. The spot was ideal for hunting. Fresh bear tracks marked the mud along the shore, and salmon filled the shallows. They pitched 3 tents, tied their boats nearby, and stacked supplies along the bank. The air carried the scent of salt and pine, and the steady hum of the river masked the distant sounds of wildlife. As night fell, the hunters shared a quiet meal. Their rifles, powerful .375H and H Magnums, leaning against their packs. The soft glow of their campfire flickered across the canvas walls, blending with the rhythmic crash of the tide. By midnight, rain began to fall, light at first, then heavier as the hours passed. The forest grew darker, and fog crept low across the valley floor. The men retreated into their tents, boots and coats drying by the embers. Only Marcus, the youngest of the group, stayed awake a little longer in a small lean-to he had built near the boats. He listened to the rain tapping against the tarp and the muffled snores of his companions, unaware that something immense was already moving through the trees behind them. At 2:30 a.m., the silence was shattered. Without warning, a Kodiak bear weighing nearly 1,400 pounds burst through the spruce and into camp. It was massive, its fur slick with rain, its breath steaming in the cold air. The attack was instant and violent. The beast crashed into the nearest tent, its claws ripping through fabric and flesh alike. The men inside had no time to react. The sound of tearing canvas and human screams blended with the thunder of the storm. Carter Hayes tried to reach for his rifle, but the bear's paw struck first, sending him crashing into the mud. Logan Price shouted for help, but his voice was drowned out by the roar of the animal. Tyler Quinn fired a shot that missed in the chaos, the muzzle flash lighting the madness for a split second before the bear turned on him. Within minutes, the camp had become a blur of motion, snapping poles, overturned boats, and bodies thrashing in the rain. Marcus jolted awake at the noise. From his shelter, he saw the silhouette of the bear looming over the firelight, tearing through the camp like a storm come alive. He reached for his rifle, knowing he had only seconds to act. Marcus's breath came in short bursts as he steadied the rifle against his shoulder. The rain blurred his vision, the cold cutting deep through his soaked clothes. Ahead, the enormous shadow moved between the tents, its bulk shaking the ground with every step. The fire flickered weakly, lighting torn canvas and crushed gear. The growls mixed with the crash of the river, and the stench of blood filled the air. Marcus aimed into the chaos, his hands trembling, and pulled the trigger. The blast tore through the night, the flare from the shot casting light across the mangled camp. The Kodiak turned sharply, its wet fur glistening in the dim glow. Its eyes flashed as it reared up, towering over the wreckage. The sound it made was a deep, rolling roar that echoed off the spruce walls around them. For a moment, Marcus froze, his body heavy with fear. Then the bear charged toward the lean-to, snapping branches and dragging a broken tent in its wake. Marcus stumbled backward, chambering another round with shaking hands. He fired again, the echo bouncing across the water. The bullet struck the shoulder, jerking the animal's massive frame. For several tense seconds it hesitated, its breath visible in great clouds. Then, with one final snarl, it turned toward the forest and disappeared into the fog. The silence that followed was worse than the attack. Only the hiss of the rain and the pop of dying embers filled the night. Marcus stayed still for a long time, his pulse hammering. When he finally dared to move, he stepped carefully through the wreckage. The camp was destroyed. The boats were overturned, the gear scattered, and the ground torn by deep tracks and pools of muddy water. The smell of gunpowder and blood clung to the air. He called out for his friends, but no sound came back except the wind. One by one, he found them, motionless and broken, their rifles lying useless nearby. He sank to his knees, his chest tight, the weight of what had happened pressing down on him. The night stretched endlessly as he sat beside the wrecked tents, the light of his headlamp flickering weakly against the mist. He could not sleep. Every snap of a twig or rush of wind made him grip his rifle tighter. When dawn came, the world looked pale and empty. The fog lifted slowly, revealing the stillness of the river and the pale shapes of the tents. The storm had washed away some of the blood, but the damage remained. Torn fabric, broken branches, and 5 still forms lying in silence. Marcus rose unsteadily, his legs stiff and numb, and walked toward the riverbank. The sun glowed weakly through the clouds, reflecting off the wet ground. He fired one last shot into the air, not for defense, but for rescue, though no one answered. Hours later, when help finally arrived, the rescuers found him sitting near the fire pit, his face blank, his hands raw from the cold. He spoke little, only staring toward the trees where the bear had vanished. The report later said it all happened in less than 3 minutes. Yet, for Marcus, it felt like a lifetime frozen in terror. The forest remained quiet that morning, but to him, its silence would forever sound like the echo of that night. It was July 11th, 2022, in the wild volcanic region of northern Costa Rica, where the air shimmered with heat and the ground trembled with quiet force. Diego Herrera, a 39-year-old hunter and field guide, had grown up exploring these unstable slopes. His father had been a tracker, teaching him how to read footprints, winds, and sounds in the jungle. Over the years, Diego had become known for his precision and calm under pressure, leading tourists and researchers into dense forests filled with life and danger. But this trip was different. He was alone, carrying his hunting gear and a determination to bring back a wild peccary, a prized animal in the region. The morning began with bright sunlight streaming through the forest canopy, birds calling from above, and the distant hum of insects rising with the heat. Diego moved steadily up the volcanic ridge, the black soil warm beneath his boots. Steam hissed from cracks in the earth where gas escaped, leaving a faint sulfur smell. Small tremors shook loose pebbles from the slopes, reminders that the volcano was never truly silent. His .30-06 rifle hung from his shoulder, and his knife rested in its sheath by his belt. By midday, thin ash began to fall, coating the leaves in gray dust. The air grew heavier, and the faint rumble of the volcano echoed beneath the ground. Diego spotted a group of peccaries moving through the brush below. He crouched low, studying their path, waiting for the right moment. His breathing slowed, his focus steady. The first sound that broke his calm was not the crack of a branch, but a sharp hiss from a nearby vent. Steam burst upward, carrying ash into his face. He wiped his eyes, squinting through the haze. That was when he heard it. A grunt, low and deep, followed by the heavy scrape of hooves against rock. From the thicket ahead, a massive wild boar burst into view, muscles rippling beneath its coarse black hide. Its tusks gleamed in the sunlight as it charged. Startled, Diego stepped back, his boots slipping on loose ash. His rifle slipped from his hands and clattered against the rocks. The ground shifted under him as the boar closed the distance in seconds. The impact came with terrifying force. The animal's weight slammed him into a boulder and the air crushed from his chest. Pain flared across his side as one tusk scraped deep into his ribs, tearing through his jacket. Diego struggled to stay upright, gasping for breath. The heat from the ground rose through the thin soil, mixing with the smell of blood and sulfur. With trembling hands, he reached for his knife, trying to push against the thrashing beast. The earth groaned beneath them as another tremor shook the slope, scattering ash into the air. The boar's strength was overwhelming, its growls echoing through the volcanic valley as the fight for survival began. Diego gritted his teeth as the giant boar pressed its weight against him. The sound of its breathing was heavy and harsh, echoing between the rocks. He could feel the sharp sting of its tusks cutting into his side as the heat from the ground pulsed upward. His knife was the only thing within reach. With every ounce of strength, he thrust it forward, striking the animal's thick hide. The first blow glanced off, but the second found its mark, sinking deep near the creature's neck. The boar roared and stumbled back, thrashing wildly, kicking up ash and stones. Diego rolled away, gasping for air, his body trembling. He grabbed a rock to steady himself and looked around for his rifle. It lay several meters away, half buried in black dust. The ground beneath him quivered again as another tremor rattled the slope, small stones tumbling past his boots. He pushed himself up and ran toward the weapon, slipping once before getting his footing. The beast was still alive, snorting and pawing at the ground. Its dark eyes glared through the steam, its breath rising like smoke in the hot air. Diego aimed his knife once more, shouting an effort as he waved it, trying to drive the animal back. The wounded creature hesitated, its strength beginning to fade. With one last surge, it turned sharply and charged down the ridge, disappearing into the thick brush below. The silence that followed was broken only by the distant hiss of vents and the crack of falling rock. Diego stood still, panting, the knife trembling in his hand. His side burned where the tusk had grazed him, blood soaking into his shirt. The air was thick and dry, filled with the bitter smell of sulfur. He felt both relief and disbelief, realizing how close he had come to death on that unstable slope. As the minutes passed, he gathered his scattered gear, his hands shaking from fatigue. The ground beneath his boots remained unsteady, each vibration reminding him that even without the boar, the mountain itself could end him. He tied his bandana tightly around his wound, then began the slow descent toward the lower ridge. Every step sent pain through his ribs, but he kept moving. The earth cracked and shifted, releasing puffs of white steam that rose like ghosts into the fading daylight. By the time he reached the base of the slope, the storm had passed, and the forest below was calm. The sounds of birds returned faintly in the distance. He paused near a stream to wash the ash and blood from his hands. His reflection in the water looked pale, his face streaked with soot and fear. The volcano loomed behind him, its peak hidden in mist, the faint glow of its vents flickering like distant fire. In the days that followed, Diego avoided the volcano's ridges altogether. The hunt had taught him a truth every seasoned tracker eventually learns, that in places ruled by both beast and earth, no amount of skill could guarantee survival. The boar's strength had been terrifying, but the mountain's quiet power was worse, always waiting, always restless beneath the surface. He never returned to that slope again, knowing that one slip, one sound, or one step too close could awaken the fury that slept beneath the ground. It was November 7th, 2023, deep in the wild backcountry of Alaska. The tundra stretched wide and endless, dotted with low shrubs and frozen ponds that shimmered under a pale moon. The air was sharp with frost, carrying the distant sound of wind sweeping through spruce trees. Ethan Caldwell, a 43-year-old hunter from Anchorage, had come with 3 friends, Jonah Briggs, Mark Lewis, and Ryan Cooper, to track elk migrating through the foothills. The men were seasoned outdoorsmen, confident in their gear and their experience. Ethan, the oldest of the group, was careful and disciplined, always stressing safety in the wilderness. Jonah, however, was younger and more impulsive, known for his adventurous spirit and quick reflexes. They had driven their large RV into the remote valley earlier that day, setting up camp on uneven ground surrounded by tundra and low spruce. The spot overlooked a stream that cut through the valley, known for drawing wildlife during the colder months. By sunset, the men had returned from their hunt tired but satisfied, having tracked several elk through the ridges. They cooked meat over a portable stove, their laughter echoing faintly through the open landscape. Plates, scraps, and the smell of cooked food lingered near the RV, unnoticed by the men as they settled inside for the night. By midnight, the temperature dropped sharply. The sound of wind whistled through the thin metal of the RV, and the fire outside had long gone out. Everyone had fallen asleep except Jonah, who rested in the rooftop sleeping pod. He lay half awake, listening to the creaks of the wind pressing against the sides. Then came a new sound, soft, heavy steps crunching through the frozen brush. The noise grew louder, steady and deliberate. The RV shook slightly, followed by the sharp rattle of metal scraping against metal. Jonah sat up, heart pounding. In the next instant, a massive grizzly bear, easily weighing over 1,200 pounds, burst from the spruce line and slammed into the side of the RV. The impact was so strong that it dented the frame, rattled windows, and sent utensils crashing inside. Ethan jolted awake, thrown sideways against the wall. Mark and Ryan scrambled, trying to get their bearings as the vehicle groaned under the weight of the predator. Outside, the bear clawed and shoved at the panels, tearing at the rear door where the coolers had been left. The scent of meat filled the air, driving it into a frenzy. Jonah, gripping his rifle, crawled to the small window above. The beast reared up again, towering over the RV, its claws scraping deep into the aluminum siding. The men inside could hear its labored breathing and the dull thud of its body hitting the metal. The sound was deafening, the storm of claws, roars, and collapsing gear filling the dark Alaskan night. The bear's growl shook the metal walls again as the RV tilted from the weight pressing against its side. Inside, Ethan tried to steady himself while Mark and Ryan shoved supplies toward the middle of the floor, afraid of another impact. The creature's claws raked across the panels, screeching like tearing steel. Outside, the wind howled through the spruce, mixing with the heavy sound of the animal's movements. It was chaos. The night split by the clash between man and nature. Jonah, positioned in the rooftop sleeping pod, forced himself to aim through the small side window. The bear's massive head loomed just feet away, its eyes reflecting the weak glow of the moon. He fired once into the air, the explosion of sound rolling through the valley. The animal paused but did not retreat. It roared, slamming its weight against the frame again, denting the wall deeper and shaking the entire structure. The men inside braced for collapse as loose items tumbled from shelves. Jonah chambered another round and fired again, this time lower. The shot echoed sharply through the rain. The bear staggered, blood streaking its fur, and gave a deep, guttural bellow that rattled the thin windows. For several long seconds it remained beside the RV, panting heavily, claws dragging across the door as if testing it one last time. Then, with a final thunderous snort, it turned away and disappeared into the darkness. The silence that followed was almost unreal. The men could still hear the wind, but the rhythmic pounding outside had stopped. They stayed where they were, gripping their weapons, waiting for any sign of movement. Their breathing was ragged, the air thick with the smell of fuel, mud, and fear. No one dared to move until the faint sound of the river replaced the echo of the bear's retreat. When the first light of dawn crept over the valley, the four hunters finally stepped outside. The damage was worse than they imagined. The RV's walls were bent inward, claw marks gouged deep into the metal. One corner of the roof had caved slightly where the animal had stood. Supplies were scattered across the tundra. Torn food bags, ripped sleeping rolls, and broken equipment littered the wet ground. Ethan walked slowly around the wreckage, running his hand along the massive claw marks. The prints in the mud were enormous, spaced far apart, leading back toward the spruce line. Blood dotted the path, but it faded quickly into the grass. Jonah stood near the door, his rifle hanging loose at his side, his expression pale and hollow. The group had hunted for years across Alaska, but none of them had faced anything like this. They worked quietly through the morning, gathering what was left of their supplies. The once sturdy vehicle was barely functional, but it would still move. When they finally packed up, the tundra lay eerily calm around them. The storm clouds had cleared, leaving the mountains bathed in pale gold light. Yet the sense of unease lingered, heavy and unshakable. As they drove away, the sound of the engine echoed through the empty valley. No one spoke. Each man understood the same truth, that out here, even the strongest machines and the best weapons were no guarantee of safety. One careless mistake had nearly cost them their lives. The deep scars carved into the metal would remain as a lasting reminder that in Alaska's backcountry, nature always holds the final word. It was October 11th, 2025, in the remote highlands of western Colorado. The first chill of autumn had settled over the canyon country, bringing crisp air and the faint scent of pine. Brett Daniels, a 41-year-old hunter from Grand Junction, had been hiking since sunrise, tracking a herd of elk that roamed through the steep valleys. He was a seasoned outdoorsman, known among his friends for his calm focus and knowledge of the land. Hunting was more than a sport for him. It was a lifelong tradition passed down from his father, who had taught him every detail of tracking, reading the wind, and moving silently through the brush. That morning, the canyon was still and covered in a thin veil of fog. Moisture hung in the air, softening the distant echoes of Brett's boots as he walked across uneven rock. He carried his trusted .270 Winchester rifle, a light pack, and a canteen. His plan was simple: follow the elk herd until he could find a good position near the narrow cliffs where they often stopped to rest. But in the wilderness, plans rarely lasted long. As the day wore on, the clouds thickened and the light dimmed. The air grew cooler and wind began to roll through the juniper trees, whistling softly between the canyon walls. Brett moved carefully, scanning the ground for fresh signs of movement. The rocky path twisted between steep cliffs on either side, the kind of place where sound echoed and sightlines were short. He crouched low, studying a set of tracks pressed into damp soil. They were recent, maybe only minutes old. He crept forward, his senses sharpened by the quiet. Then the sound came, a soft scrape of rock above him. It was faint, almost hidden under the sigh of the wind. Brett looked up just in time to see a flash of movement. Out of the fog and shadows, a mountain lion leapt from a ledge, its muscular body cutting through the air with terrifying speed. It landed barely a few feet away, claws extended, teeth bared. Brett stumbled backward, his boots slipping on the slick rock. The cat lunged, striking his shoulder with a powerful swipe. Pain shot through his arm as claws tore through his jacket and into his skin. He fell hard, his rifle nearly slipping from his grip. The air was filled with the panicked snorts of elk nearby. The herd bolted in every direction, hooves pounding against the stone, kicking up dust and debris. Brett rolled onto his side, raising his rifle with trembling hands. The predator crouched again, ready to spring. He fired once into the air, the sound echoing through the canyon. For a moment, the lion hesitated, muscles twitching under its wet fur. Brett fired again, his hands shaking. The cat hissed, swiped once more, grazing his thigh, then slipped back into the misty brush, disappearing as quickly as it had appeared. Brett's entire body shook as silence returned to the canyon. The echoes of his last shot faded into the mist, replaced by the faint rustle of the wind through the junipers. His shoulder throbbed, and a warm flow of blood soaked through the torn sleeve of his jacket. The mountain lion was gone, swallowed by the shadows and fog, but every instinct told him it was still close. He stayed perfectly still, his breathing uneven, eyes scanning every corner of the cliffs around him. The elk herd had vanished in chaos, leaving behind broken branches and deep hoof prints pressed into the mud. Dust hung in the damp air, mixing with the metallic scent of blood. Brett winced as he shifted his weight, pain shooting through his leg where the animal's claws had grazed his thigh. He needed to move to higher ground. Remaining on open terrain meant risking another attack. He grabbed his rifle tightly, forcing himself to stand. The slick ground made each step treacherous. Small rocks gave way beneath his boots, sliding down into the canyon below. He could feel the storm building again, the rumble of thunder growing louder, and the wind pushing cold air through the narrow passage. The rain returned, light at first, then heavy, stinging his face and soaking his clothes. Brett followed the ridge, moving toward a ledge he had scouted earlier in the day. It was a small rise overlooking the canyon floor, with a view that would give him a chance to spot movement. He climbed slowly, using his free hand to steady himself against the rocks. Every noise, a branch creaking, a pebble falling, made him tighten his grip on the rifle. When he finally reached the top, he dropped to one knee, his heart hammering. For several minutes there was nothing but the sound of rain. Then he heard it, a low growl echoing faintly from below. The lion had not gone far. He aimed toward the sound, but the fog was too thick to see through. He waited motionless until the noise faded into the distance. Only when he was certain the predator had retreated did he allow himself to rest. He tore a strip from his undershirt and wrapped it tightly around his bleeding arm. The fabric turned dark almost instantly. The pain was sharp but manageable. He knew he had to reach his truck before dark, but the canyon's trails were slick and narrow. Every step down was cautious, deliberate. His strength was fading fast, but the thought of staying in the open kept him moving. It took nearly 2 hours to reach the base of the ridge. By the time he made it to his vehicle, the rain had slowed, leaving a cold mist hanging over the landscape. Brett sat behind the wheel for several minutes before starting the engine, shaking from exhaustion and shock. His shoulder burned, his thigh ached, but he was alive. Later, medical staff would clean and stitch his wounds. The cuts were deep but not fatal. The experience, however, left a mark that would not heal as easily. In the months that followed, Brett stopped hunting alone. The canyon where the attack happened remained off his maps, a place he would never visit again. For him, the memory of that silent leap from the cliffs was enough to serve as a lasting reminder that in the wild, even the most skilled hunter can become prey when the balance shifts for only a moment. It was September 10th, 2024, deep in the cold wilderness of northern Ontario. The air was crisp, filled with the faint scent of pine and river mist. Grant Hollis, a 43-year-old Canadian hunter and avid outdoorsman, had spent much of his life exploring remote lakes and rivers in search of trophy fish. Known among his friends for his quiet patience and deep respect for nature, Grant preferred solitude over crowded lodges. His work as a forestry guide gave him months each year to roam freely across Canada's wild northern regions, where only the sound of water and wind kept him company. That morning, he had set out early, carrying light gear and a reliable .45-70 rifle strapped across his back for safety. His main goal was to catch northern pike, a fish known for its size and power. The section of river he chose cut through thick forest lined with willows and moss-covered stones. The sun shimmered faintly through low clouds, turning the slow current into a mirror of silver light. By midday, Grant had reached a wide bend where the water ran deep and calm. He waded slowly into the river, feeling the icy current press against his legs and chest. Each step was cautious. The riverbed was scattered with slippery rocks and hidden logs. He cast his line again and again, focused entirely on the rhythmic pull of the water. The wilderness felt timeless, quiet, and still, until a faint rustling sound carried across the bank behind him. Grant turned, scanning the trees. At first, he saw nothing but the dark wall of spruce and the shifting fog that clung to the edges of the river. Then, without warning, the brush erupted. A massive bull moose, easily over 1,000 pounds, burst from the shadows. Startled by his movement in the water, it charged instinctively, its antlers glinting in the weak sunlight. The animal's size was staggering. Its hooves splashed into the river with explosive force, sending waves crashing against the rocks. Grant tried to step back, but the current caught his legs, pulling him off balance. The moose swung its heavy head, and one broad antler struck his arm, tossing him sideways into the freezing current. Water surged into his mouth as he fought to stay afloat, his body numb from the cold. Gasping, Grant managed to grab onto a half-submerged log, the rough bark scraping his hands. The moose thrashed in the water nearby, its massive form sending sheets of spray into the air. The sound of its heavy breathing and splashing filled the narrow river bend. Grant's rifle was barely within reach, tangled in weeds. He clawed toward it as the animal turned again, its dark eyes locked on his movement. Grant's fingers tightened around the wet log as the bull moose turned sharply in the churning water. Its muscles rippled beneath the soaked fur, nostrils flaring with every breath. The current surged harder, pulling against Grant's legs, threatening to drag him under. The water was ice cold, numbing his arms as he struggled to keep his grip. The moose stomped forward again, splashing wildly, its massive antlers slicing through the mist. Grant's hand brushed the stock of his rifle, barely visible beneath the swirling current. Using every ounce of strength, he pulled it free, water pouring from the barrel. The moose lifted its head high, shaking water from its mane, and then lunged once more. Grant steadied himself against the current and fired. The sound cracked across the river, echoing against the surrounding cliffs. The shot grazed the moose's shoulder, tearing a shallow wound through its thick hide. The animal let out a deep grunt of pain and fury, thrashing in the shallows. For several tense seconds, the water exploded with motion. Branches snapped, waves crashed, and the sound of hooves striking rock echoed like thunder. The bull reared up, kicking against the current before finally turning away. It crashed through the reeds, vanishing into the dense brush with a violent rustle that faded into silence. Only the rushing of the river remained. Grant clung to the log, chest heaving, muscles trembling from exhaustion. The water around him swirled with mud and bits of debris from the struggle. Slowly, he began to crawl toward the bank, his boots slipping on smooth stones. Each movement sent a jolt of pain through his arm and ribs. By the time he reached the shallows, his breath came in short, ragged bursts. He collapsed on the cold gravel, soaked from head to toe, the world spinning from the shock. Minutes passed before he could gather enough strength to sit up. His shoulder throbbed where the antler had struck him, and his palms were scraped raw. The fog lifted slightly, revealing the disturbed riverbank. Large tracks marked where the moose had entered and left deep and wide, proof of its incredible weight. His rifle lay beside him, streaked with mud, but still functional. As the adrenaline faded, a heavy realization settled over him. He had not faced a predator, yet the danger had been just as real. The bull had not attacked out of hunger or anger. It had reacted in pure panic. In the wild, fear could turn even the calmest creature into a deadly force. Grant looked across the quiet water, now calm again, and saw how quickly nature could shift from peace to chaos. He spent the next hour drying his gear and cleaning the rifle, his movements slow and deliberate. The river had claimed part of his strength, but not his respect. When he finally made his way back through the forest, the sound of the current followed him, steady and unbroken. That day, he understood that danger in the wilderness often came not from predators, but from the sheer unpredictability of the land and the animals that called it home. It was February 11th, 2022, in the far northern reaches of Svalbard, where the endless Arctic horizon met sky and sea in a frozen blur. Sindre Johansen, a 38-year-old Norwegian hunter and field tracker, moved carefully across the sea ice. For more than a decade, he had lived and worked in the harsh northern environment, guiding research teams and tracking Arctic foxes during long, isolated winters. He was quiet, deliberate, and deeply familiar with the dangers of the polar landscape. Every step, every shift of the wind carried meaning in his world. That morning, the temperature hovered far below freezing. The air burned his lungs as he breathed, and the dry snow squeaked beneath his boots. Sindre carried a bolt-action rifle strapped securely over his shoulder and a pack filled with food, flares, and spare ammunition. His fur-lined hood was rimed with frost. Around him, the sea ice stretched for miles, a field of jagged white floes and glassy blue cracks shifting slowly with the tide. The pale sun never rose high enough to warm the land, its dim light reflecting off the surface like cold fire. Sindre moved steadily, scanning the distant ridges of ice for signs of movement. He had followed a trail of small paw prints earlier that morning, likely belonging to an Arctic fox hunting seabird remains. The tracks wound across frozen drifts weaving between mounds of ice. But as the hours passed, the weather began to turn. A thick fog rolled in from the sea, swallowing the horizon and dimming the light. He stopped often to listen. The wind carried faint creaks and groans from the ice below, deep and hollow sounds that seemed to come from the heart of the ocean. He knew that beneath the frozen crust, shifting currents carved dangerous cracks that could open without warning. One wrong step could mean a fall into freezing water with no chance of climbing out. Then, through the gray fog ahead, a faint shape began to move. At first, he thought it was another floe drifting in the current, but the shape shifted again, larger, slower, deliberate. The outline of a polar bear emerged from the mist, its white coat blending perfectly with the snow. It was massive, easily weighing over half a ton, and it moved with the heavy confidence of an animal that ruled its environment. The ice groaned under the bear's weight as it crossed the floe, sending shards tumbling into the sea. Sindra's heart began to race. He stood perfectly still, raising his rifle slightly but not yet aiming. The bear was still far, but it was watching him. Its nose lifted to the air, testing the wind. The ice beneath him cracked faintly, a sound that echoed like thunder through the silence. Every instinct told him to stay calm and steady, for in the Arctic, sudden movement could mean disaster for both man and beast. The polar bear stood still for a moment, its breath rising like steam in the freezing air. Sindre did not move. The world around him felt completely silent except for the steady groaning of the ice. Each slow step the animal took sent cracks running through the surface, echoing through the stillness of the fjord. His gloves were stiff with frost as he raised his rifle, his finger shaking slightly from the cold. The bear's head lifted higher, its dark eyes locked on him through the mist. Then the floe beneath the creature shifted. A loud crack split the air as ice slabs broke apart and dropped into the dark water. The bear let out a deep roar, its massive paws gripping the edge as it pulled itself forward onto a thicker sheet. Sindra's body tensed as he aimed upward and fired a single round into the air. The sound rolled far into the fog, bouncing off invisible cliffs. For a brief second, the bear froze, its ears twitching at the noise. Then it began to circle, testing the surface carefully, the crunch of its claws muffled by wind and snow. Sindra stepped back slowly, feeling the ice flex beneath his boots. Every movement had to be measured, calm and silent. A single misstep would send him into the freezing sea. The fog thickened, swallowing the horizon completely. All he could see was the blurred outline of white against white. Another groan came from beneath his feet, louder this time. He steadied himself, eyes locked on the bear's faint shape. At last, the animal turned. It began to move away, heavy and deliberate, crossing toward a larger floe in the distance. The outline faded into the mist until it was gone. Only the sound of cracking ice and rushing wind remained. Sindra stayed still for several minutes, breathing hard, his fingers numb and his eyelashes coated with frost. When he finally lowered his rifle, exhaustion sank in. His legs trembled as he made his way back toward the distant coast, careful to test every step. The fog lifted slightly, revealing faint light from the pale Arctic sun. Behind him, huge paw prints marked the ice, each one pressed deep and wide. By the time he reached solid ground, the wind had carried away the last traces of the encounter. The sea ice continued to groan and shift, as if alive beneath the endless cold. Sindri looked once more toward the horizon, understanding that in the Arctic, The fight for survival was never against one threat alone. It was against the land itself.